So, David Gregory, Herman Cain appearing to have a very rough run this past week, like Rick Perry after he was in first place for 15 minutes. But we now have the statement that he said on Piers Morgan a couple of nights ago saying he was pro-choice. We around the table suspect, despite the fact he's trying to back off of it, that's probably not going to play well in Iowa.
No, I don't think so, particularly because this is an area in the Iowa caucuses where he wants to make a stand. A lot of these candidates, Cain, Perry, Bachmann, and the rest, are trying to make an Iowa strategy work as the anti-Romney candidate. The thing that strikes me about Herman Cain, and when I interviewed him last week, it first came up, you know, this business about making a joke about an electric fence, or his performance in the debate where he says, well, no, I wasn't asked about al-Qaeda and letting a hostage go, and it's so clearly there on the tape. I mean, he's either not remembering things or he's just playing a little bit loose on some of these things, but it's not a good strategy. You know, you can't play that loose on some of these issues and be shown to be ill-informed or to just be that inconsistent.
David, it is hard for people in the mainstream media who are trying to be fair to state what seems so obvious to so many Americans, that Herman Cain is making this up as he goes along. He's on a glorified book tour, and he has absolutely no organization in Iowa or New Hampshire. He's not going to the early states. He does not appear by any objective standard to be running a presidential campaign.
Well, I think it's a fair point in terms of organizationally not ready. But look, he's caught some lightning in a bottle here with message and with biography, and he's seeing how that can grow. I don't think that in and of itself is that unusual. But take foreign policy as an example, and I thought the Bachmann clip there was very telling. I mean, look, this is 2011. The country's been at war for a decade. This is not a pop quiz to George W. Bush in 2000 about who the leader of Pakistan is. I mean, you had Rick Perry who referred to that Pakistani country. If you want to be president of the United States, and you don't have fluency,
is this surreal? It is surreal.
But seriously, if you don't have fluency on issues like Pakistan, which is the most dangerous country in the world and where all of our interests in that part of the world are interwoven, that's a serious problem. I mean, for Michelle Bachmann, who supported wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, to say that we're disrespected around the world because of what President Obama has done, I mean, you can criticize his foreign policy and do other things, but it reflects a lack of understanding of some depth of foreign policy. I mean, I think about the Hillary Clinton ad, 3 a.m. phone call, are you ready? I asked that to Herman Cain because that's an obvious question now. It's every bit as obvious as the economy.
Now,
I'd like to try a question about Herman Cain, and that is whether he's really serious about running for president of the United States or whether he's getting out of this what he wants, which is a platform, a kind of celebrity. He's going to get a lot of speeches after this. He's got a constituency now that he never had in his life. I think he comes out of this in terms of his own objectives. He never seriously thought he was going to be the nominee of the Republican Party. He comes out of this a winner in this crazy culture.
He's a businessman.
Crazy culture. I don't know if the reason is business.
Sloganism.
I can't be in the guy's head, but he's not a serious candidate for the president of the United States. But there have been some other Republicans, as you suggest, like Perry, who also cannot be conversant, or Bachmann, with the world we live in.
I was on a panel last night with Matthew Dowd, who is the political director for George Bush. He said he met Herman Cain the other day, and Herman Cain was like messianic about, like, I am going to be president of the United States. And I think, Carl, to your point, he may not have thought that he could be president when he started this. But when you get, and this happens with candidates all the time, when you suddenly look up and you're #1 in the national polls, what started out maybe as a cynical attempt to become more public or driving away speaking fees, suddenly you're at 35% of the polls and you say, hey, maybe I could be president.
Let me say this, though, Gene Robinson. If in the middle of that campaign, when you think you have a chance to win, you stop giving the paid speeches, which Herman Cain is still giving. You stop going to book events and instead go to Iowa and go to New Hampshire.
Stop selling your book.
And go to South Carolina.
that.
He's not done that. He has no political organization, and he is going to book events and paid speeches instead of going to where he should be, Iowa. New Hampshire.
You're right, Joe, but I agree with Heilman. I think he looked up and he saw himself on top of the polls and said, well, by gum, I'm going to be president of the United States. The thing is, in addition to doing the organizational things you need to do to run a presidential campaign, you ought to think through positions on issues like abortion, for example.
Yeah, that would be good.
And realize that you can't be wishy-washy on that. If you believe that abortion is murder and that it is wrong, then you're not going to like Herman Cain essentially taking the pro-choice position. He's not going to be able to get away with that. And the lack of thinking and analysis, boy, I'm using the word analysis and Herman Cain in the same sentence.
Well, there really is not. His immigration policy is an electric fence. Yeah. His Gitmo policy is release all al-Qaeda prisoners in Gitmo for one U.S. soldier, which nobody would do. His policy on abortion is scattered. He clearly, and we've said this from the beginning, he clearly, Caddy K, is making this up as he goes along.
Well, and he's certainly reversing his positions as he goes along. I mean, you know, I think, you know, David's quite right. It's not enough in this day and age to be able to make kind of fun of foreign policy by making up some joke name about a stand, Becky. I mean, the country is at war. We've had 2 wars. We've been involved in Libya for the last 7 months. You know, it's not acceptable today for a person to be running for the president of the United States and just say, I'm going to run on jobs and the economy, and you know what? The rest doesn't really matter. I mean, there's a little bit of Sarah Palin saying people with big fat resumes don't have, you know, that's not what really counts. Well, actually, you know what? If you're going to be president of the United States, you need a big fat resume, and it has to be right across the board.
You know, I have people all the time asking me, why is it that you just pick on Republicans? I guarantee you, if there were a Democratic presidential candidate, no, I'm serious, if there were a Democratic presidential candidate who 7 months into a war in Libya did not know that Libya was in Africa, I would debone them slowly, fillet them, and have them for breakfast every morning. But right now, that's not the world we live in. Right now, David, we have a Republican Party that, going to Gene's column this morning in the Washington Post, the majority of those presidential candidates on the stage, other than Newt Gingrich, Ron Paul, and Mitt Romney, and of course Huntsman, don't seem to have even thought out a basic construct, analytical construct for foreign policy.
Well, 2 quick points. I mean, before you pile on Herman Cain, President Obama also came into office.
I'm sorry, I've got to throw Rick Santorum in there too. I'm sorry, go ahead. No, Rick is a senator for 2 terms. Go ahead.
No, on day 1, President Obama came in and said, we're going to close Guantanamo Bay, which to a lot of people appeared as kind of a fantasy. And it's still not closed for lots of reasons that make it really hard to close, and lots of very difficult choices that have to be made. So he could get that sort of criticism too about having sort of fantasy ideas about what you're going to do to just turn on a dime in foreign policy. But look, the Republican Party, to be fair here, is in the middle of a big rethinking about what the United States' role in foreign policy should be, as is the Obama administration. I mean, we're at a very significant turn here in terms of how counterterror policy is waged, how we're going to use large land-based armies in other parts of the world. We're in a period of pulling back all of that and rethinking how our military is used and what our foreign policy is. It's actually, I mean, it's a fascinating time. It's a dangerous time. But, I mean, the tempo of counterterror operations, of drone operations, has completely changed warfare and is going to change how the Republican Party thinks about this.
But David, if you're going to have a radical rethinking of foreign policy, all the more important for you to understand foreign policy. We're talking about a failure of basic competence of leaders like Perry, that Pakistani nation, Bachmann, who was in front a couple of months ago, not knowing what continent Libya is on, and Herman Cain making fun of Becky, Stan.
Much deeper
there's no question about it. I mean, I think you have to have a certain threshold of understanding. We all understand that when you become president, everything we're talking about on Morning Joe and in the course of the campaign may pale in comparison to what you actually face when you get into office. Something is going to happen. And that's the reality you have to be prepared for.
Well, can we have a serious politics? Here we are having a discussion that we don't hear in the political debate. That's the problem. Are we capable in this country of a serious political discussion at the level of the caucuses and the level of the candidates?
That's a great question.
The answer so far is no.
The answer's scary. David, Gregory, thank you very much.
Hey, David, who do you have on Meet the Press?
We're going to have a serious politics discussion.
Yes, you are.
Senior strategist at the White House, David Plouffe, and then Ron Paul. He's got some views about foreign policy as well. We'll be asking him about those. Part of our Meet the Candidate series.
Yeah.
All right, David, thank you. We look forward to that. Eugene Robinson, thank you as well.
Thank you, Gene.
Coming up, the Reverend Al Sharpton will join us on set. More Morning Joe when we come back.